Welcome back, everybody. You're watching Abstract Live, and my name is still Manfred, and I guess I'm still the CEO of Abstract, at least as of today. I'm sorry for being a bit late, guys, but we had some issues with the setup. I don't know what happened. I guess something like a Windows update, and our setup got completely scrambled, and I really don't know what's going on how people run these live streams, to be honest. What do you think, Jeremy? It's so difficult when the setup is so inconsistent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just glad we were able to get the ball rolling, but happy to be back here for another Wednesday live stream.
Absolutely, and we've got a lot of exciting things to talk about today. Maybe you can directly switch to the desktop so people can see what I'm actually talking about. One of the changes you guys might have already seen is that if you go to our Instamat YouTube channel, it's no longer the Instamat YouTube channel. Instead, it's actually our Abstract channel. And a big reason for this is that the management of so many different YouTube channels and social accounts is pretty difficult. And we believe just simplifying that to a single channel has a lot of benefits downstream for you guys, but also for us. We just have to manage one channel all the time, but also when we upload videos, you guys will be able to not have to check so many different channels. And by the way, while we were talking about channels, if you didn't do it, hit the subscribe button and also click that notification bell. That's really important for us. I think there's only a few people that did this so far out of all of our subscribers. So make sure to hit the subscriber bell. That's really important to get the notifications.
Yeah, and I'm also excited to see videos that combine multiple solutions together. So I think there's a video coming out really soon which shows how we can, kind of similar to some of the stuff we might talk about today, where we can use Instalot and Instamat together to create some really powerful workflows. So stay tuned for some really cool videos coming soon.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's actually also something we want to show today in this live stream. I have to take off these glasses. I'm so blind with these in the studio. But yeah, that's something that we want to show today in the stream, right? Where we're building an asset from scratch using Instalot and a bit of kit bashing and then doing the rest in Instamat. But let's first go through the list of things we want to talk about today. I guess you guys saw it already. If you follow our socials and our website, we have released a big update for our integration. So if you go to our website here, you can find a news update where we go in depth into all of the different things that we changed. And it's a pretty big update because we're trying to make the release cycle more consistent. And I think being able to do this in October, the team did a great job in tying this up. But also, it's not just one integration we're updating. We're updating all of our integrations at the same time. So you'll be able to find updates for Blender, Unreal Engine, and also Autodesk Maya, and of course Autodesk 3D Studio Max. And there's a lot of great improvements here, from better performance, better UX, faster loading times, more features of Instamat that are now available in those integrations. Did you have time to check out these new integrations, Jeremy?
I had a little bit of time. Yeah, I started using the new Blender integration and also in Unreal Engine. And although the performance is pretty fast already, it's great to see that, you know, things can get even faster, especially with larger projects and dealing with multiple materials. And I think overall, the real heavy hitter here is the update to the 3ds Max plugin. It gains a lot of really good functionality. I believe it was one of the later integrations that we introduced, and so now just having it catch up to the feature parity, but also the power and the behind the scenes, improvements to see in 3ds Max. It's also great to see.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I think people don't really understand yet what you can do with those integrations, right? It's obvious if you have access to the material library. That's pretty awesome to be able to render all of the materials in Unreal Engine, because you'll have infinite materials at your disposal, basically, or when you create your own materials. But the ability to take like an asset texturing project and then rendering it in Unreal Engine or Maya directly without having to open Studio, or building more complex procedural asset pipelines with Instamat, where you load a mesh and you do a UV unwrap, then you texture it automatically, and the input to the mesh is not something you bake in Instamat. It could be like an input mesh that you drag onto the integration and basically do that based on a Maya mesh or a Blender mesh, which is pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, so from my experience with using the Blender integration, you just select an object in Blender, you choose from any of the nodes or projects that you added to your library folder, and so it just allows you to build these really complex and powerful tools that work right within Blender or right within the engine that you're using, and it becomes this really nice streamlined way of working where you can create these really custom workflows right from within Instamat.
Yeah, that's some really amazing stuff, and I think we'll have to do a lot of live streams for people to really see this, because I believe if you don't show it to people, they don't really understand that there are some really amazing possibilities here. Right, then moving on, then the next thing to mention, if you guys are in Germany, we're going to be at the Heilbronn, me personally, together with some of our commercial team. We're going to be at the Slush. It's the first time the Slush happens in Germany. I think usually, I might be wrong, but I think usually it is only happening in Finland, I guess. At least I've been to a couple of Slushes in Finland. So yeah, I mean, that's more of a startup conference. But if you guys are, maybe you guys are cooking something, building something, come by Slush, talk to us. I guess it's more of a networking conference. It's not like SIGGRAPH or GDC where you see a lot of, cool stuff from the industry. This one is very particular to startups. It's not even 3D. It's like very broad. And I guess there's going to be a lot of AI stuff this year. It's probably like 99% AI companies. Yeah, that's Slush.
That's awesome. Also, really loving the new camera angle there.
Always trying something new. And there's also today, actually, I think this got released. Is this really awesome video from InspirationTuts? Have you seen it, Jeremy?
Yeah, it was really nice to see, especially the topics that we're covering. It's always a subject that we're really trying to show off and push with Instamat, which is that scalability side of working within Instamat.
Yeah. And also the change resilience, right? I think in the video, I like that they showed this, that if your UVs change or you have to rebake or whatever, everything still works. The whole project just works. So I think these guys did a good job at picking up exactly, what makes Instamat great when it comes to change resilience and scalability. So shout out to InspirationTuts. Great job on this, guys. I think the video is doing pretty well, right? They have 3,000 views in one day, 100 thumbs up. That looks pretty good. 180.
Yeah, I really like how succinct it is and to the point. It always has, a really great follow through and delivery, and just the examples that they're showing, just the different meshes. And you can see they're just dragging on a project onto different parts of the model, and it still fills in everything nicely. It's just a really nice presentation. So yeah, thanks a bunch for making that video.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's create some tutorials ourselves. So what I wanted to do today, guys, is to show you end-to-end how we can build something using really fast kit bashing workflows. And the idea is really not creating the ultra perfect asset, but how can we create an asset really, really fast? Now, how can we texture it fast? How can we use it fast? So we're going to start here in Slot Studio, and I think there should be a file flying around here somewhere. I don't see it. Maybe it's in the stream folder. Yeah, there it is. So what we want to do, guys, is we want to kit bash a high poly asset. So we are just going to take some random photogrammetry or other high poly assets, and we're going to kit bash them in Instalot. And then we want to use the remesher to quickly do a retopology on the asset, but also create all of the baking targets that we need to then quickly texture it in Instamat as well. So let's bring in our mesh here. What's nice about the workflow, we're not going to show this here, but in this case, we're using these raw assets. I think you can see those stones and rocks and this pile of dirt here. Normally, if you have photogrammetry assets and you would kit bash something like existing stones, there's a really nice workflow you can do if you just not just bake the bake targets, but also bake the color textures, and then you bring those color textures into Instamat as well, and you can use them during your texturing workflow. That's something we can take a look at in one of the future streams. But today we just want to take a look at how we can quickly build prop from a couple of these assets. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think this is a really nice workflow. The remesher really seems to have no end to its usefulness. Even just taking a fully finished asset and creating something that's, game ready, good to go right away. But this is another, kind of, I wouldn't even say secret power, but another side to the remesher, which allows you to build, beautiful, but also highly optimized assets right within, InSlot Studio or even in the integrations like we were talking about before. So I'm excited to see what we make.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this as well. I don't know. I'm looking at these assets and trying to think of a composition I can do here, but I guess we will be able to do something. I'll just start with taking this rock and then maybe rotating it a bit and creating a stack of those rocks. Maybe like this, and another one. How do we rotate this guy? Maybe scale it down. Move this over here. Yeah. I mean, you can fill the void while I'm trying to think how I have to what keys I have to press. Now how I have to navigate Instalot here. So we have a couple of rocks here. I'll duplicate this one as well. So you see, this is all just a single rock that we're rotating around and twisting and turning.
Yeah, so are there any things that you're keeping in mind in terms of how the remesher is going to process these assets? It looks like you're making sure that some of these things are overlapping in some cases.
Yeah, actually, I'm not making sure. I just want to quickly assemble something, and I don't have to be too precise, because the remesher will take care that it removes the hidden faces, so I don't have to think too much about, is this occluded? Do I have to manually cull it? And it's a reason why I like this workflow quite a bit, because you don't have to be so precise about the technical part. You can focus more on the artistic side of things, in exactly the way that I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, so I just saw what you did there was you moved an asset over and then you press the F key to focus. And what that does is it focuses directly on the asset that you're working on, and it centers the camera right there. So you don't have to worry about switching different places and zooming around the scene. You can just select an object and hit F, and then you're kind of right back where you need to be.
Yeah, exactly. And to duplicate, I hit Control D, by the way.
That's a hot tip as well. And using W, E, and R, if you're familiar with something like working in Maya, those should be hotkeys that feel right at home to switch the gizmos between the translate, rotate, and scale.
Yeah. I mean, we want to be fast. This shouldn't be a too perfect asset, so maybe you guys see something that just looks completely off. I'm just trying to quickly assemble this asset while making sure that it's at least somewhat consistent when it comes to, the depth of the alignments, and nothing should be floating around in the scene.
One thing that you really don't have to pay too much attention about is the polygon count, right, of all these assets. Yeah. So I think you're using straight, imported from something like ZBrush or scanned, information here. And so, the polygon count, I can't see it quite on my screen, but it's in the millions from what I could tell in the scene.
Yeah, right now it's 2.5 million roundabout.
Great. Wow, yeah. And just being able to think about the artistic side, but not worrying too much about how heavy this scene is going to be is really nice and really helpful for creative workflows.
Yeah, and what you would normally have to do if you want to bring this into your game is you would have to do a manual retopology, right? So it's not enough to just create a nice prop. You'll actually have to do the work to reduce the poly count again, so you can actually bring it into your renderer.
Right, and you would have to, make sure that you create a low poly mesh that catches all of the information from the high poly perfectly when baking, and not to mention having to do a complete UV unwrap to be able to capture all those details and make sure that the texel density and the quality is great. So it's a lot to do. I mean, thank goodness I no longer have to do that kind of workflow manually anymore with Instalot, because the Remesher kind of does that all for us.
Yeah, there's one thing that you should know. We don't have autosave in Instalot, so I'm going to save my asset right here. I think that would be nice to have an autosave feature when you work like this, but one of the issues is that if you work with millions of polygons, just saving the scene can take quite a few seconds to transform it into a scene graph and then write it to disk. So just the export here took quite a bit, because the file is 160 megabytes already, because it's so high poly, and it's going to get worse, right, once we add more stones. So for the next layer, I'm just going to select all of these guys, and I duplicate all of them, move them to the top, and then I hit E to rotate them, or I'll click this button here, and then we can just rotate all of them together. So that adds a bit of variation without having to manually, rotate and change it and switch it up again. But we can break it up a bit more if we manually tweak a couple of those stones.
Yeah, so when sculpting stones like this, in a sculpting program, I always think about making sure that you can look at the rock from all these different angles.
Yeah, that's important.
So it's great to be able to just, it's an asset that you can use, in 6 different configurations, while also being able to scale and transform it. So it's really nice to have this kind of modular kit to be able to build really pretty much anything. I mean, we're building some kind of wall here, but you could create something like a pile of debris. You can even create materials in Instamat using geometry like this. So really nice to have these kinds of assets in your back pocket.
Absolutely. So I do the same again with our concrete slabs here, or whatever this is supposed to be. At least for me, it's like broken concrete pieces. And I'll just take them and, again, duplicated all of them, rotated it around a bit so the tiling or the repetition is not so obvious. And then we just place them on top so they're not floating. At least Don't appear to be floating too much. Move it a bit down here.
There's a couple ways to rotate here in Install the object. So you have the rotation axes for the red, green, and blue, right? But you also have that white kind of circular outline as well, and that's the camera space rotation, right? So you can kind of just rotate it based on the angle that you're facing with the camera.
Yeah, that's actually quite helpful, but sometimes it's more difficult to get a precise rotation with the camera-based orientation axis. It's still a great feature, but it's somewhat difficult to, if you want to precisely align and place things.
Also, I believe we have the world space and local space rotation and transformation, right? By hitting, I think it's Q on the keyboard, and then there's the globe in the toolbar, which also sometimes I find myself switching to, world space transform view to keep things
absolutely
easier.
Yeah, that makes it easier, especially if you turn it around a few times, then you want to move it on the x-axis. That gets very difficult. I actually think it's looking pretty cool already.
Yeah, I'm liking it so far. Sometimes it's just easier to just get in the zone, I find, oftentimes when I'm concentrating on something, it's just good to just feel the rhythm, feel the vibe while you're making something like this.
How many more layers should we add to this?
You could probably take what you've done so far and layer up another, 2 rows like that to get a nice kind of wall pattern.
Yeah. 2 rows. You mean take everything and just
stack it and rotate it a little bit. Yeah, just kind of exponentially grow.
That might be enough, and then we can locally just tweak some of those stones.
One thing I also do is start making groups, so if I have a row and I put it into a group, then it makes it much easier to select everything as another cool tip.
Yeah, I forgot one of those concrete slabs here, but I think that's actually not bad, right? So we can break up the whole look of the asset by, just forgetting one of those. Yeah. That's the cool thing about those kit-bashed assets, like Jeremy mentioned a bit earlier, is that if you have just a few pieces, just rotating and scaling them, you can create some bigger object that really looks like it's been built from many different pieces.
Yeah, and the ways to even just use this combined piece, are quite expansive as well. Using this as some kind of floor, using this for a building, using this for some kind of war zone. And then you can of course kit bash what you've made here with other pieces if you have other parts in the library.
Absolutely. All right. Maybe we can get rid of this one as well. No, it looks a bit empty, right? I think it does need this slab here. Maybe scale it a little bit.
I was going to say maybe you could stretch some pieces out or, make them smaller, fill in the cracks. But overall, I think this is pretty solid.
Yeah, I do agree about filling in the cracks. That's what I would have done next, just to place something in some gap so it breaks it up again, add some small details. And you really don't have to worry about these intersections too much, as long as it looks good, that you have one object where the visual consistency is given. It doesn't matter if something else is completely occluded. Like if I would move this slab here like this, even though it occludes the rock, we can now scale it a bit on the y-axis. You wouldn't see that it's not really correct, right? But this case is not so good because you have some overlap that's not really visually consistent.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say, if it looks impossible, from just a quick glance, then it's probably not something you wanna do there. But if you have something that kind of is believable in a way, I mean, just take a look at video games from maybe I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something. The assets that they're building there are believable to the eye, especially if they're something that you're running past in an environment. Sometimes even things don't have to be pixel perfect, in an environment like this. It's okay to kind of get away with a little bit of leeway. And then of course there's always the battle of time, right? When you're building out a level, how much effort can you put towards a hero asset that's going to be right in front of you in a big cinematic, or if you're building a few walls that you're just going to see for a few seconds, you can kind of get away with a little bit more.
All right. That looks good. I see one repetition here on this rock and this rock that I don't like. And these two guys. So we can probably just rotate this around the x-axis a little bit.
And so we're going to show this kind of remeshing workflow, and then, the reason why I'm thinking about this out of order is because we kind of know what the remesher is going to do, right? We're used to the functionality. But once you start playing with the remesher a little bit more and you start building these assets, you're going to kind of understand how it works, how it thinks when it processes and combines assets together. Where is it going to merge pieces together, and in what way is it going to affect the normal maps and the textures that it's going to create? And just having a few, use cases or chances of trying it out, you kind of get a feel for, how you're able to model things like this. And I promise you, it is so freeing to be able to build an asset like this just by combining a few pieces together and not having to worry about the rest of the technical processing that you would normally have to do.
Yeah, it's really, once you use it a few times, you start to learn how it works. When something doesn't look right, what you have to do to make it look right. So it's a very intuitive tool, I think. Maybe let's make that a bit longer.
We've got a question here. Just a quick question from the chat. Would you recommend texturing it in Instamat and remesh the final asset, or start with remesh and then bring it into Instamat?
I would probably first remesh and then bring it into Instamat, but it really depends if you have UVs on your asset, right? In this case, we don't have UVs, and it's also a quite heavy object at this point. Let me save it in the background while I talk. At this point, it's a quite heavy object. It has quite a lot of polygons, no UV unwrap. So now I would have to unwrap 2.5 or 3 million polygons. That might take quite a while. But it really depends on your workflow. I think if your target is low poly, it's better to get the base mesh into a low poly state and then take it from there. That's what I would do. And the beauty is, because it's Instamat, everything is robust when it comes to changing your UVs or rebaking it. So you're good to go back to Instalot or Maya and do a few changes in Blender and then re-export it, reload it into Instamat, and then continue your texturing. So you're not forced to, it's not settled when you bring your mesh into Instamat. You're free to change it. And I think that for me is a good argument as to why I would want to do it, to do the low poly in Instalot Studio and then remesh it to a target poly count. And if I later feel in the game it actually should have a bit more polys, or I should have less polys, I can just remesh the base mesh again and then reload it into Instamat Studio.
Yeah, the flexibility here is super nice, and it's, again, something that we as an industry have to get used to with software like this that gives us that flexibility. We can just get something in game, and then see what it looks like. If it's too much, that's fine. We don't have to redo our texturing. We can just import it into Instamat or remesh it in remesh it in Instalot, and that flexibility is really nice.
So what I want to do next is combine all of these meshes. And the reason is, when I texture this, I want to have two objects on my mesh ID map. I want to have all of the bigger rocks and all of the slabs in two different mesh IDs, so I can target them really fast by just selecting the respective colors. I don't want to have all the objects individually. You can do this, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense here, right? We would want to apply some kind of a rock texture to the rocks and some concrete material to the concrete slabs. So I think it's enough to have these two mesh ID groups. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, no, you're doing exactly what I would do as well. Now that I'm thinking ahead about how I would use masking and all the different tools in Instamat to work, I can prepare the mesh ahead of time so it's a breeze to texture later in Instamat. So being able to identify those different parts and how you're going to texture it is a great way to kind of plan ahead while you're building the asset in Instalot.
What would be nice to have here in Instalot, that's something that we still want to work on, is the ability to quickly position objects. For instance, to right-click a part here on this slab and then just say move the object to this position. That's stuff that you could already do, for instance, in RSX, but not yet in Instalot. But I think that would be a great feature to quickly kit bash these assets together and not spend too much time on individual object placement. Because I feel like placing some in 2D, everything's always easy, right? Placing a rock like this in 2D is super easy, but placing it here in 3D under this other rock might be quite tricky to do. Maybe I should actually place it.
Yeah,
below
you
this
know,
rock here?
I rely on snapping, you know, physics-based positioning and things like that all the time just to be able to quickly move things around, especially in a game engine where you're really building out the scene. And yeah, I think that'd be an awesome feature to include in Instalot as well, because honestly, Instalot replaces most of my DCC tool use, you know, day-to-day use, you know, when it comes to just unwrapping UVs or even making small assets like this, or fixing the mesh by, you know, welding vertices and fixing normals and stuff like that. All the little things that I'd normally need to open a larger program for, you know, I could do right here within Instalot. So yeah, of course, I'm always more excited to add more features and useful things in Instalot. So it's a good idea.
All right, so once again, let's go back to combining the mesh. I'll select a couple of these rocks here. I wonder how fast the operation is going to be. I haven't tried it. It's going to be quite a lot of meshes to combine here. So we have 2 million polygons, quite a lot of different meshes, and I'm going to hit mesh, and then from the menu I'll choose combine. Let's see how long that takes. It's done. And now we have combined 17 nodes together, and I'll do the same again for my... Did I actually select the small rock? I think I did. Yeah, I did. Another great feature, if you want to know what you actually did, is the filtering button, by the way, guys. So this button right here enables a filter, and if you have a selection, it will only ever display you what you have selected. But if you don't have anything selected, you'll see the whole scene, so you can always back out, find what you want to take a look at, you can select it, and you see the object isolated.
Yeah,
Right.
the filter is something that I use absolutely constantly. And also, as an added bonus, the filter lets you perform various mesh operations on what you have selected as well. So if you have a scene that you just want to remesh a few things, you can select them and use the filter, hit start, and it will only remesh what you have filtered.
All right, so we've combined those objects here. And I'm thinking what to do next. Maybe quickly save this thing again.
I always recommend saving as much as possible.
Yeah. Would be nice if you could do that stuff asynchronously, but a lot of the different libraries, like in this case we use FBX, it's single-threaded, so you can't easily do the stuff in the background here. Actually, that's also a good thing to tell people, because what we've seen in the Instamat community is that a lot of people use OBJ, for instance, as a portable format. So they export from Blender as OBJ and then load it into a different tool. I wouldn't recommend this. I think FBX is a really good format because it can save meshes in binary, so it's very compact, but you can embed textures, for instance. You can export your tangents, which is really important. Because, for instance, an OBJ might have normals but no tangents. So you bake your mesh, and an Instamat would compute the tangents for you. And then you load it into a different tool that computes tangents in a slightly different way, and that would result in your normal maps not looking right. So make sure that you save as FBX, export your normals, export your tangents, so when you bake the mesh and you later use it somewhere, all of the tangents are correct and it actually renders fully correct.
Fantastic tip. You know, I really mainly only deal with FBX as an interchange format with everything that I do. And then whenever I have to export into something very specific, you know, if it's, you know, web-based or something like that, then I, you know, make sure I start from my FBX and then try to export something into the format that the destination is. But really, FBX has been just kind of the bread and butter. It's a great format.
Yeah, and what I realized is we could use this debris plane here actually for our prop as well, right? So it's a bit sunken into something, and we could use that ground plane here as well to remesh parts of it and actually texture that part as well. So when we place our wall somewhere on a terrain, it wouldn't look so empty. I mean, that's also good, right? I mean, it really depends how you want to use the asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And does the ground plane, does it have back faces underneath it, or does it have just like a mesh on the bottom there? I'm trying to recall.
I don't know. I think it looks empty.
Okay, so then there's a setting that we can use to make sure the remesher handles that properly later on.
Yeah, so what would you do here?
In this case, I would just tell it to ignore the back faces so that it doesn't have to model out the other side. Because inherently, a lot of times what remeshers do is they try to create these watertight meshes, and they kind of look at the boundaries where the mesh ends, and they see that there's no faces on the other side. So they're going to want to model twice the amount of geometry on the other side of this ground plane. But what we can do with Instalot is pretty cool. We can actually tell it to recognize where the edge of the map is, where the edge of these boundaries for the mesh are, and just tell it not to model over those faces and create extra topology.
That's one way to do it. I think what I would do here in this case is actually to use a clipping plane so we can truncate that part, So we don't need ignore back faces. Ignore back faces is great, but there's always some cost to it. And in this case, I would probably prefer to if I can use the clipping plane, to instead use the clipping plane. So
the reason... Yeah, I was going to say the clipping plane is also a fantastic option, especially when it comes to things like, fixing scans that have extra data on the floor, from photogrammetry. The reason why I would hold off in some cases to using the clipping plane here is because if you did want to sink this into the ground a little bit, you have that intersection kind of space to take advantage of, so you can move it up and down a little bit, and you wouldn't have to worry about, not getting that completely flat plane. But either way works. It just depends on if how far it's going to sink into the floor or not. And of course you could do it again afterwards, right? You can remesh the object a second time with the clipping plane, or use a clipping operation further down the line. That can also fix the problem.
Yeah, so we have our prop assembled here. Actually, I added these 2 concrete slabs. I should actually group them in with our overall slabs, right? So let's just select all of it. With the filter we can see what we selected, and then I'll hit combine again like this. So that's our ground plane, and we have the rocks here, and then the slabs. Okie dokie. So what I would try to do is see how I can use a clipping plane here. So I'll spawn a clipping plane, and you can move the clipping plane around in any way that you would want. And one of the nice things is that Inslot will consider everything sealed off behind the clipping plane and automatically remove it. And as Jeremy mentioned a bit earlier, is that the Remesher really prefers to have watertight meshes, because if you have a hole in your mesh, what will happen, even if you have no back faces, the Remesher will creep into the hole and then mesh out the inside of your mesh. You can avoid this if you enable this ignore back faces button right here. So if you have an open non-watertight mesh and you still want to remesh it, you can use this. You can just enable ignore back faces, and the Remesher wouldn't model out these interior parts. But I think like this, it does work pretty well when it comes to the clipping plane.
Yeah, I think so too. And also, I didn't even realize having that visualization there really makes it easy to kind of quickly, it's like a crop, in like an image editor. You can really see like what it's going to look like when you sink it into the ground. Yeah,
and you could use multiple, right? If you want to constrain it further, like the x-axis, and narrow it down, you could create another clipping plane to do that. So we can choose to use the CPU baker. I'll prefer to use the GPU baker because I want to bake AO with quite a lot of samples, and that might just take a bit. And then I'll go to the texture output, and the texture output settings are similar to the bake settings in Instamat. If you know how those work, you'll feel at home here. And what we want to bake for Instamat to texture it is a tangent space normal, an ambient occlusion map. We don't need custom textures. The custom textures is what I mentioned a bit earlier. If this would be photogrammetry assets, you could bake custom textures to transfer the base color map from your photogrammetry asset over to the baked result. And that's really great, because when I was working on photogrammetry assets and retexture them, I always take the original map over and then use that as a basis to texture in Instamat. But we don't need it, but we do need the position map, mesh ID, curvature, and a thickness map, I guess. And then you have some settings down here. We can control how the baker works. I want to increase the AO sample count. And I think the rest is fine.
In terms of resolution, how do we kind of determine how many pixels, how much resolution should we have for these kind of maps? I mean, oftentimes I kind of start with 2K, with super sampling enabled there by default, and kind of work my way up from there.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you should approach the bake targets is to ideally bake them at exactly the same resolution that you're going to end up using it. Otherwise, you might have some artifacts when it comes to sampling the mesh ID map, because pixels, when you sample a 2K map at 4K, they might blow up and they get bigger. And then you get these fringes and you mask things that shouldn't be masked, but vice versa. The same will happen if you downsample a 4K mesh ID map, for instance, to 2K. You'll have some textures that merge as part of that downsampling process. The colors change and the mask won't work as it should. So make sure to, if you use Mesh ID, to bake all of that stuff at exactly the same resolution that you end up using it. And I'll save my scene once more. Autosave would be great, but as you guys can see, it's questionable because it takes so long. And then it would always interrupt your workflow. You drag something around, autosave kicks in, and then you have to wait until it's done saving, which is not a great experience. But it's done.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me in other applications.
All right, then going back to our remesher. So up here you have a couple of settings, and when I do the first remesh, I typically just keep everything on the default settings to see what's going to happen. So let's see. That shouldn't take too long.
Yeah, this is probably going to happen pretty snappy, but just one other thing to mention as well.
It crashed.
Let's say for...
What happened?
Oh, no.
I've never seen this before.
It's the live stream voodoo.
Yeah, probably. Screen sharing and all of that stuff. That's taxing the GPUs. But that's why we saved.
We saved for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say one thing I thought of, when we were talking about the baking information and baking setup is that the Remesher has some pretty powerful things behind the scenes with normal maps. So if your scan data, for example, comes with a normal map and it's a tangent-based normal map, for example, when it remeshes and creates a new version of this model that we're making, the tangents aren't going to be in the old normal map aren't going to work because we're creating some new geometry, right? The normal map isn't going to be accurate. So it just this really magical thing behind the scenes where it recomputes the normal map so that all the details that you had from the source mesh that has all that normal data also transfer over to the remeshed version that it's making. And it really, what this means is you don't have to think about this whatsoever. So you have like a scan from something and you get all of the, the normal map detail, and then you just remesh it, and then all of the details from the geometry, but also all the details from the original normal map transfer over kind of magically to the remeshed version.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the benefits that everything is just normally magically just works. But when this crashed right now, while we wanted to do the bake, I'm quite sure it's either the latest upgrade to the new Mac OS, or it's because we do a screen share and the GPU baker didn't like it, but we'll see. If you go back to my screen, I had to reset up all of the settings that I did before, and I'm not sure if you guys saw this or we transitioned out of this already, but if you saw it, the reason is that when you export your mesh, you save the FBX, but you don't save the settings that you're doing, so you have to create this profile and save it. So now I saved this profile, and if something happens, I can just drag my JSON file back in and it would reload the corresponding settings. But let's see, I'm really not sure what happened. It might have been the clipping plane as well, but I do want to use the clipping plane here. I mean, that's the thing about computational geometry. There's like everything is different. Everything is always a completely different scenario, and every topology is different, every setup, and that's why it's so tricky to get these things working as stable as we normally do them. But let's try to rerun this. We have this time we use the CPU baker, or you know what, let's try the GPU baker, and I'll save my profile again because I added the clipping plane to it, and if I reload it, if something happens again with the baker, then we don't lose the clipping plane settings at least. Let's see.
Yeah, this is one of the things I always try to teach people right at the beginning of working with Instalot, is that the processing instructions, what you're doing to the model is completely separate from the actual geometry that you're processing. And this is by design. This is so that you can design workflows that can process a whole lot of geometry. So when you save a file outside of Instalot, you're not saving the profile instructions with the geometry. You have to save them separately. And that's you can export multiple scenes, you could create multiple versions of this rock asset, which is looking really awesome, by the way. And then you can save your profile settings to do this a whole bunch of times over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. So this is our baked asset, and if we look at it with the AO map, the previous asset didn't have an AO map, so now we get some nice contact shadows here, and you can take a look at the different channels, similar to how you can do it in Instamat. If you hit C, you see all of the different maps, the normal map, the AO map, the mesh ID map. So let's go back. Maybe disable this. Yeah,
that's a great way to preview those channels, just by hitting C to make sure the bake turned out how you expect.
So you can see some artifacts here. I don't know if you can see it, but the remesher fused together the parts that are close together, and that's great. That's exactly what it should do, and that's something that you can control with the resolution here, where you can exactly control how close the welding distance between meshes is to close the gap. So we can just change the resolution here to high, and then hope that the GPU remains stable during the screen share, and then we can just run this again.
Yeah, and what you just did was go back in the timeline as well. This is a pretty cool feature in Instalod where you can process a mesh multiple times or multiple pieces kind of in a sequence. And then if you want to go back and try to reprocess something or do a different step again, you can just go up to that timeline there in the top right. In this case, Manfred just went back to the original scene where nothing's been remeshed or processed in that case, and then just try something again. It's another way that Instalod's very iterative.
Yeah, so as you can see, the artifacts are much smaller and it still has a very reasonable poly count. I guess it's floating a bit, right? So that's something that you could fix by actually closing the gap so it wouldn't want to try to fuse the meshes together here. So that's because we didn't really construct this right, but I don't know what we should do. We could go back on the timeline, as Jeremy mentioned, and then just actually fix those meshes. Or we could increase the resolution, but at some point the computation will become more expensive. You see here,
Yeah,
I
you
actually
have to
didn't
think
close
that-
the gap here, right? So,
Oh, right.
oh, but I combined it already. But what you could do is, of course, you can split the mesh and then combine it again.
Right, I was just going to mention that you can split by adjacency in this case, and what it does is it looks at all the meshes that aren't completely all connected together, and then you can just separate them and recombine them.
Yep. I wonder if the original meshes were correct or if they also had multiple pieces. No, in this case, it actually worked well. So we split it again. And maybe we should move this rock down a little bit. And then we have to move this. We would have to split those as well. So we can cheat a bit, probably. I can just scale up this guy. Like this. I guess now it should be better.
Yeah, it looks nice.
So the rocks have been split here.
And I definitely recommend, just so that we don't have any live stream voodoo today, that we go ahead and save this before remeshing.
That's a very good point. So let's do that. I mean, it's amazing that we can even do this, right? Something like the remesher, where where Instalod reconstructs the topology. It's doing a UV unwrap and it's doing a bake. It's quite awesome how fast it actually is, and you can see that how while I'm saving this mesh, that even saving a mesh that has so many polygons can take quite a few seconds to actually work. All right, so this has been fixed. We moved the rock down so we don't have the artifact, so we could rebake this and just run it again. We could also try to increase the resolution to very high while we're doing this, but this might now be plenty slow. But let's just see. If it's too slow, I'm going to kill the process and then just rerun it with the high so we can at least continue texturing here.
At least it'll be faster than having to retopologize it by hand, right?
That's true, yeah. I mean, that's the benefit. And that's what we mentioned earlier, that like you have to learn a few things about how the remesher works, which kind of situations work super well and create beautiful meshes, and which situations are a bit tricky. And actually, we work with a tricky situation here because we have these gaps where slabs are not perfectly aligned. And if you would have done that properly, you wouldn't have to find the right resolution here. And actually, what you can also do is, instead of increasing the resolution, you could also decrease the resolution, so it's creating a tighter fit of your asset overall. But the remesh resolution here set to very high is insane. It's like a 1000 cubic resolution of precision, which is really, really high. And you see it still did it super fast. And this is like a MacBook, I don't know, M2 or M3, something like this. Yeah, so here's our final result. And I think this looks pretty nice.
Yeah, it's looking great. I love adding that AO map on. It always makes the definition and the volumes feel a lot more present like this, especially when you don't have any kind of real-time shadows.
Absolutely. The thing is, we baked so many times. Am I going to be able to find the right maps now? So Instalod saves your baking results, all of your textures, in the Instalod user folder, similar to Instamat. And then there's the export subfolder. And here you can see what happened. I baked quite a few times, which means I have quite a lot of different bake results. I can probably sort by time here.
You know, a quick tip that I have actually is when you export the FBX, it's going to package all the baked mesh maps right into the FBX. Is that right? Or does it not save all of the curvature and stuff in the FBX as
No,
well?
you can do that. Absolutely.
Oh, great. And then what I do is I just drag it back into Instalot and it unpacks all of the maps for me, and then I just drag those into Instamat.
Yeah, that's actually a good workflow. But I'll just let me see the mesh ID map. Actually, what did we do for the mesh ID map? Did it group it right? Yes, perfectly. You can see we have our stones are green, the slabs are blue, and the ground is red. So this will allow us to do a really nice texturing job here on this asset. And I'm going to export this asset to my desktop as the kit bash, and then we just call it the low. And I think I don't want to embed any texture, so I'm going to disable the embed media option. The rest is fine, and then I'm going to just hit save.
While that saves, we have a question here from the chat. What is the advantage of saving as an FBX rather than Instalot Mesh ILME?
I mean, the ILME for us is only really a mesh that we use to, when clients have issues, they should send us the ILME and then we can inspect it. It's a type of mesh format that represents your geometry exactly as it would then be processed by Instalot. But it's not really designed to be a portable format like GLB, USD, or FBX. So I would recommend you guys to use the FBX overall. GLB is great if you want to, if you're sure you're going to use that for rendering, then GLB is good. It's very, very small and the mesh is prepared in a way that it's ideal for rendering. Whereas in FBX, it's more ideal for both rendering and modifications. And USDC is somewhat in the middle, I would say.
Great, yeah, thanks for that question.
All right, let's load this into Instamat.
So for those of you who are just joining us today, we are doing a pretty cool workflow where we're kit bashing a whole bunch of different assets together in Instalot. And now we're getting to the part where, we've created our new mesh of combined assets and we're bringing them into Instamat to be able to texture them.
That's what we were going to do here next. So here's our mesh. We loaded it into Instamat like this. It looks pretty low poly, but that's exactly what we want to have from our mesh. But once we bring in our baked maps, it should look all right. So let's go to our bake folder, and then we could store them in the package actually. Then it makes it easier if people want to send it around. So let's first bring them into our package. So I'll just take all the mesh maps. I don't need the color map, but I do need the other maps, and I'll just bring them into the package. And you can see Instamat imports all of the textures. I'll rename my project. Actually, it's named correctly already, so I'll just save my package. So here's our baked textures, and now I can just assign them to my channels. So this is the AO map, I guess. If you're unsure, you can switch to the list view. That helps you pick the right files. The curvature map here. Then the mesh ID. The tangent normal. The world
And also,
normals.
just so you guys know, when you create a new project, asset texturing project in Instamat, the ambient occlusion channel is actually disabled by default, and this is done for various reasons. But the reason why you might not be seeing it, right away is just because it's turned off. So if you add that ambient occlusion map and nothing happens, you can go ahead and do what Manfred just did, which is just add the channel.
Yeah. All right, so now we loaded all of the different textures, and you can see the rocks look really nice now. We have our AO channel enabled, as Jeremy mentioned. We also have the baked textures assigned, so it looks really, really nice, exactly like our high poly asset. And you can also see we don't have any baking artifacts anymore on this asset because we increased the resolution. Because I was too lazy to fix those areas where the slab almost connects to the rock, but it doesn't. And this is the kind of situation. Those wedges are not great. So to fix that, I bumped up the resolution. All right, so what are we going to do next? Maybe we can just start by finding a good material for the rocks, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
What should we use here? Something
I usually
rock?
start off by either creating some groups with some masks or just quickly throwing on a material.
Let's see. What kind of rock do we want?
By the way, everyone, this is Instamat's built-in material library. So when you download Instamat, you get over 1,000 procedural PBR materials that you can use for all of your projects. And we're just scrolling through some of them now. But this is one of the fun things I like about using Instamat is there's a whole bunch of materials. And what you'll notice is, once we add them, they aren't just static, right? You can go ahead and change them and manipulate the settings for all these materials to kind of tweak it. So if the material almost looks perfect, then what you can do is just, dial in some of those parameters from the PBR, from the procedural material to get it looking exactly the way that you want.
This already looks pretty nice with that coast rock. It adds a bit of hues to the rock as well, so I don't have to do that. And then what we should do is probably scale it down because the projection covers the whole object, and let's increase the tiling a little bit. And because I scaled down the projection and I want to retain the sharpness, I'm going to my projection settings, and here I'll switch to anti-aliased, or maybe even sharp. Like this. It's pretty nice. But right now we applied this material to all of our objects in the scene, and because the Remesher computed a single object from all of those, because they got merged together, and remember it removed the hidden faces, and to do so it had to combine it all into one object. You can disable this in Installot by remeshing as distinct construction, but in this case we wanted a very efficient low poly asset. And what I'm going to do to add the separation back into my texturing project, I'm going to add a mask here, and I'll choose the mesh ID to mask, and this works based on the mesh ID map that we baked earlier, and I can just pick a color and then choose the green color, and you see now it's masking off our rocks perfectly, and it's only applied to the rocks and not to the slabs.
Nice. I'm actually really impressed on how the projection is working on those rocks to not see, too many repetitions or cracks, merging between rocks there. It's doing a pretty good job already.
I think I assigned the wrong mesh ID. Shouldn't these have been part of the rock, or are those slabs? I mean, it doesn't matter. It looks like a broken off slab. At least this is a slab, but this might as well have been a rock actually, but it doesn't matter. And then for the slabs, I would probably try to find a good concrete texture, and we have a lot of really nice concrete textures here. And let's see.
And yeah, if you do, find that you have a mesh ID map that isn't, spot on, you can always use another form of masking, right? We have so many different really powerful masks in Instamat, from the volume mask to the mesh submesh mask to, all kinds of things like that too. So all is not lost.
We should probably save this as well. It's always tricky to get lost in the moment, right? You're locked into the moment, but then you forget to save. So never forget to save. It's really important to save. Yeah, I'm not sure which material we should use here. I'll just use this concrete dirty. I'll bring it onto my material stack, and then that actually looks awesome even for the rocks.
I was gonna say it's really nice when you have
beautiful.
Using those kit bashed assets. It's really difficult to have something that looks bad, because you have all that detail, and it's just there, and then you don't have to worry. One of the things I like about this is there's a nice balance between the sculpted geometry detail, and then we're just adding on these really nice additional details for the texture phase. It's not relying too much on one or the other in this case.
Yeah, it's pretty much automatic. You put something on, it looks great. I mean, just this asset already looks so beautiful, and I really like that I didn't have a slab here to break up the tiling and the consistency of the object. I think this looks great. I really like the way it looks right here. So, and then we need to find something for the ground, and here we can probably use. What would you use here, Jeremy?
For what kind of detail are you adding?
For the ground plane that we still have here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a really cool soil, like a roots-covered soil that you could use. We could do moss instead. There's a category, I think, completely devoted to just grounds.
I'm thinking more of something like gravel or...
Yeah. And we can color correct these stones to make sure that they match our other assets as well, just by dialing a few of those parameters. It's really like just playing and being creative here. It's nice to have like such a large amount of choices to choose from, to be able to find something that's really nice.
Yeah, something like this. Because you have those small pieces lying around, and it had the base structure of this kind of gravel already.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And because the original geometry also had so many crevices and nooks and crannies and things like that too, it kind of plays on top of the detail that we're adding with the texture.
Yeah, let's take a look at the ground category though. Maybe there's something better. Grass, dirt. Shores.
It's actually something I recommend to people who are just getting started with Instamat. Just open up the library panel and just explore all these things. Not just the materials, but also like the different nodes and effects and grunges and things like that. But really, you could get lost in just all the materials that we're adding here. And there's always more, coming as well.
Roots covered soil. I mean, let's try. Let's see what happens here. And the great thing is I don't have to set up the mask again. I'll just drag and drop my mask onto the other layer and it's going to be mostly automatic. I mean, it does work. I don't like the roots too much. And I feel like what I don't like about this is the color pattern. The rocky concrete was more like a consistent color pattern when it comes to the rest of the asset as well.
Yeah, I agree. The light tones that you have with the concrete and then kind of the mix with the other type of stone. Yeah, I agree. But of course, if you didn't like the roots in that material, you could just remove them with a parameter.
Fair point.
Well.
Let's do that. The roots. We remove the roots. Yeah, I guess it works like this.
We've actually got another question in the chat about the coloring as well. What do you think is the most efficient workflow? Would we use a color match filter to be able to match the color or something? Or would you think that just experimenting with the tint and dialing in the color manually is more efficient?
I do like the color match workflow. It's very, very powerful and easy to use. So let's try it. I'll use a color match and I'll just pick the color right here from one of the slabs. And then we can just dial in how much we want to match it. Yeah, it would work. I mean, you can save 2 variations of this asset, right? And then if you would use it in the forest, you could use it with the soil. And if you use it in a city block, then you can just use the concrete like this. And maybe we should also take a look at some dirt or mud. Do we have some good dirt here? Dirt land. Let's try this one. Yeah, I actually like this. I think that looks
pretty
great.
Cool. It's funny because I think each variation that we're showing here has possibility, could be used. This could definitely be something that looks really nice. It just depends on the creative direction that you want to go.
Yeah, and I could also just drag and drop my color match filter, right? So you see without the color match, right. I feel like the intensities are a bit too high, and enabling it just makes it fit a bit better together. But I mean, it's very much an artistic choice what you want to do at this point. But I think the asset looks pretty good. You can see how it looks without AO. AO really adds a lot for this asset. So we'll have to make sure that we build a lot of those details into the asset so it's not too much dependent on the AO itself, but that's not too difficult. What I would do here is use the AO map to add dirt exactly where the AO is, so it looks even good when you don't render it with the AO map, but because this adds a lot of plausibility to the asset. So let's do that next. I'll save my package and then I'll add a new layer here, multi-channel layer, and I'm going to add a black layer, and this layer should be very rough because it's going to be our dirt layer. And maybe fine tune the black so it's more like a dark brown.
Yeah, I actually find when adding dirt, oftentimes, commonly what people do is like add one color for the dirt. It's a brown color or it's a blackish color, and oftentimes dirt actually has like a ton of different muted tones in it, right? Like even purples and reds and greens and blues. So it's something that not necessarily people will see or understand and say, oh, that ground has blue tint to it. But it is something that you notice, if it's not there.
Absolutely, and that's something you can do easily with generators, by the way. But for the moment, let's just use a single black color. We can always refine this asset later. So I added a mesh mask builder, and that's a really nice mask because you can do quite a lot of things with it once you understand how it works. And you have these different feature categories here, but if you go to ambient occlusion, you can control how much your AO map is driving this particular mask. And what I want to do here is set that to 100. And you see now the mask influences the color channel quite a lot, and if I disable this, you can see exactly what happens. So it's using the AO map to create a mask, and you can also control how strong that effect is by adjusting the brightness of the mask like this, or if you want to blur your AO a little bit so it covers more range, you can do that. So like this looks pretty much like baked in AO, which is something that you may or may not want to do, but what I want to do is actually break it up, because for me this should not just be baked in AO, for me this should be a dirt layer. So I'm going to the grunge 1, and what you can do here is blend in a grunge map and control whether it adds to your mask or if it removes to the mask. So first let's set it to 1, which means we add it to our mask, and then I'll pick a grunge, and I think a good grunge to add here is probably one of the spots noises. Maybe spot 6, and you can see what it does if we set it to +1. So now it combines with our AO mask that we set up in the upper category, and you see how it blends in. And if I set it to -5, for instance, you can see it actually subtracts from the AO mask that we set up to +1 up here. So it's like plus and minus are combined basically here. So if I set this to fully -1, you see it fully removes the AO map, which is not something that I want to do in this case. And you can also control the projection. So you see here I'm scaling down my projection so the dirt is a bit smaller. And I don't want this dirt or this mask to fully remove the AO map, so I'll just set it to -0.5.
I actually think it was looking pretty cool with the dirt kind of overlaid on top as well. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, I
agree.
Also,
you can also have multiple ones too. You can have 2 grunges or more.
Indeed,
it's a nice way to build it up.
That's what I would do next, but I want to set up a specific mesh mask builder and not use this one, because with this one I just want to modify my AO map so it looks a bit cleaner, or better, not so clean actually. So the next grunge I'll also set to -5, and you can see that these together equal -1. So together they can fully remove the AO if both of them have a value at a specific position. And here we're going to use maybe spots 2. And you can see right now my projection still controls grunge 1. But if I zoom out, you can see that there's another projection box right here. And you can actually switch between which projection you control if you hit page up or page down. But you can also select which projection you want to control from this funny looking button here. So now I'm controlling the outer one. And again, I'm scaling this down like this. And you can see that nicely breaks up the AO, so it doesn't look like AO, and it actually does look more like dirt. And then you can also control the brightness and the contrast. I think for dirt maps that's always good, so they're a bit more contrasty. But again, it depends how you want this to look like. Like this, you can see with more contrast, less contrast. I do like it to be more contrasty here. And you can also control the final mask the mesh mask builder creates if you modify those settings here at the top, where you can then adjust the final brightness, the final balance. So if I crank up the brightness here, you'll see now the mask becomes very, very strong. So you can mix all of those individual masks together and then increase the final contrast if you want the mask to be a little bit sharper.
So I'm kind of putting together a little getting started tutorial here. So the first thing I mentioned people should do is look at the library first, right? And look at all the different things inside. But I think the second thing people should do is check out the mask builder, because of all of these different tools kind of combined into one, the things that you can do with just some materials and the mesh mask builder really could be 50 to 80% of the entire texturing workflow right there.
Yeah, absolutely. A mesh mask builder can really accelerate the workflow. Most of the stuff you can do by hand, but you end up with a really big mask stack, and the mesh mask builder combines all of those different masks and folds it into a single mask. So let's add another one of those mesh mask builders. And here we want to create a gradient from the bottom to the top. But you see now my previous mask disappeared. And the reason is that this mask is set to multiply. And right now the mask is empty. So it multiplies the mask that's white with the black one, which is the second one we just added. So what we want to do here is we want to add to the mask. And you can also rename your masks, by the way, which is a super nice feature. So here I can call that AO based dirt. And then here, what we want to do is a ground dirt. So I'll rename that to ground dirt, because what we want to do here is similar to what we did with the AO, but instead of using the AO, we can use a gradient here. So I'll enable the opacity here for my gradient, and you can see I get a widget now for my mesh mask builder, but it's inverted. And to fix this, I'll just click the invert button, and then I can control the gradient very precisely using these two gizmos, and you can even move them around. I want it to be axial, so I'm not going to drag it horizontally. I'll leave it like this. This is pretty nice.
This is something that I do almost all the time. I think, as soon as I discovered this feature, it's something that I add to pretty much everything, because one thing you'll notice now, when you're walking down the street, is that the collection of dirt is always near the bottom in most cases, unless it's something like rain, but that's something else. Even actually, especially when it's raining, because of splashes and things like that. So, when you're also exploring the mesh mask builder, try adding on a gradient like this, and you're going to see that it's another one of those texture details that you just kind of feel, you just kind of see it when it's miss it when it's gone. And adding that gradient for the build up, especially for something like this where you have that ground plane even in the shot, really nice addition to blend the two elements together.
Yeah, so for Grunge 1 I use eroded moisture because it really gives me all of those rainy details that I want to have here. And then the Grunge 2 is going to be moisture leaks, which again gives me a lot of those washed out details that I want to have here in this grunge. And we can make it a bit brighter. And for this one, it might make sense to scale it down. It depends how big you want the washed off rain to be. Do you want to have a lot of like smaller washed out details like here, or should it be like bigger details that you wash out? And actually the eroded moisture I should also scale down. I want this to be a bit finer. So I'm scaling down my eroded moisture as well. And then if we go back to our ground dirt here and we look at the top, we have this. It's actually looking a bit funny here if you look at the top, right? Because now you have the dirt running down in a way that it's not really physically plausible, because it should accumulate in those areas around the stone, but not running down our soil. It would sink into the soil, but not run, vertically down the soil. This looks really weird. And to do this, we could use another mask here, which is the direction mask. And we enable this. And you see here I can specify directions where I want the mask to be applied. So if I set this to top 1, now all of the areas for top 1, where top 1 is, we don't see that, but it will apply. And I can also use that to remove all of the detail. So you see, if I set the main opacity to -1, it's going to remove that from our overall mask. And again, if I set that to 1, you see now it applies it to all the top layers as well. Again, I can control the direction where I want my mask to be applied. Here to all the faces that are looking upwards, so that's top. You can also do front, so then you have all the faces that look towards you. Here you can see it, so this is the front of the mesh. If I set that to 0, you see now they're all gone. If I set it to 1, you see now you have it all over the mesh. So actually you could enable that just slightly, very, very slightly, to front, back, right and left as well. But maybe we should do that in a separate mask, because we don't want to add here actually. So I'll just undo that here. What we want to do is we want to set it to top, but instead of +1, we want to set it to -1. And as you can see, this fixes our issue that we had here at the bottom, where we had this accumulation of the grunge that looked so funny when it was running over it. So again, this is what we had before, and this mask corrects it for us automatically.
Nice. It's great to see the different types of masks in the builder kind of work together.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you know how it works, it's a really powerful tool to do something that you would normally need to do through separate different masks, adding, subtracting, multiplying. And this makes it so easy to do exactly this. And I think what we could do here as well is probably add a bit of AO noise to it. Maybe not too much. Just, it would exaggerate the areas where you have AO with the dirt, because then it wouldn't be washed off. And again, we can control our gradient if we want this effect to be more visible over the mesh or less. And then we can also control the final brightness of our effect here, if we want to have less of this or more of this.
Looking great.
Yeah.
What's pretty cool about this now that you've built up this kind of effect stack or workflow is that we could reuse this over and over again. We could save this as our kind of dirt rainy filter or dirt rainy material, save it to our library, and then because everything that we're doing here in Instamat is procedurally applied still, even though we're doing a lot of manual artistic kind of tasks and things, controlling it. What's nice is it still can apply to any other asset that you want.
Absolutely. And you can even paint in details by hand, right? If I want to have more dirt here, I could just add a mesh mask painting, and then I can paint more details into the mask. Again, I have to set it to be additive. I don't want to remove details here. And then we can just paint in more details exactly where we want the details to be. So you can do something similar to what I did with the mesh mask builder. I can just mask all the areas where I want to have my dirt being applied. So I'll just add it in like this. Very simple. And then we can add another mesh mask builder where we could subtract from this mask like this. Or you could just use a projected mask. Actually, if you just need one layer, the mesh projected mask might be better. And then it's quite similar. You can use a grunge like spot 3, for instance, or spot 6. And then you can do a subtract here and then subtract out the dirt at the bottom.
One thing we also added recently in a recent Instamat update is that you can apply filters and effects to masks as well. So you could do something like a slope blur or a warp to your painting, right? And then that could push and pull kind of the more, rounded brush that you painted into something a little more natural.
Yeah, so one issue we have now here is that the upper subtract layer removes from our ground dirt and the AO-based base layer as well. So what we can do is we simply set this to additive, and then we move those layers to the top, and we make our paint layer the new base layer, and then the order is correct again, like this. So now that's the base layer, and then we can subtract as we want from it. Maybe scale it up or scale it down. It's quite intense right now, the black, so we can adjust that a little bit. I'm not sure what the best way for this would be. Probably a filter. Let's try a filter. Because it's the base layer, the tricky part is if we remove that, we lose too much of our mask. So I think what we would want to do here is probably add a filter, levels filter. Let's see if we can correct it with a levels filter, and I insert it here in between. And then we want to, we can just level it. You see perfectly. That's pretty awesome with the filters that we have those now in Instamat that you can level it. But actually, I just realized I could have used an eraser brush and just erase the details because it's a paint layer, right? But you can...
Sometimes the simplest things aren't the most obvious.
Yeah, but it's beautiful that it's procedural. So I actually like it this way because now I can go back here and I can paint in some more details if I want to have some dirt around this rock, for instance. I can just paint like this, and then I'll get those details in, and I can... It just works perfectly together with the levels, and I don't have to adjust brush intensities, erase, add, erase. So like this, I feel like it's very consistent in how it works. So that's our AO dirt, which we can increase or decrease with the brightness, the ground dirt. I think that looks pretty nice. What else should we do here?
We actually have a question about exporting textures once you're finished with the asset. Someone asks, so what would you prefer when exporting the textures out once you're finished? For game engines like Unreal, for example, would you export them out as images in Instamat, or would you prefer to use the integration between Instamat built into Unreal Engine?
I think I would prefer to use, in a case like this, I would probably want to have the textures exported, put it next to my FBX, and then archive it somewhere. Maybe upload it to Polyverse, for instance. That's a really good way of doing this. But if you feel like you want to work just purely based on Instamat and the integrations, I mean, one of the issues is that you would have to render the project then in Unreal Engine. That's absolutely doable. You can do this, and it works perfectly. But there's going to be some overhead to doing this, and it's not as straightforward to just importing your textured asset. But it perfectly works. I mean, it really depends what you prefer more. The benefit of bringing the package in is probably that if you change it, it's very easy to just go back to Unreal Engine, select it, and re-render that particular mesh. So it really depends on your preferred way of working. So I think we need some grease here as well. So to do the grease, I'm actually not going to do this myself. I'm going to go to our prefab materials, and then I'll just drag it onto the layering stack, and it adds the grease for me. I don't have to do much. So you see that just adds a bit of grease. And I almost feel like the projection is a bit too big on the grease.
So yeah, what Manfred just did there is just like in Instalog, we have the same hotkey to be able to cycle through the different channels that we use to build up our PBR materials. So you can hit C in Instamat as well, and then be able to have that kind of, I wouldn't call X-ray vision, but it's another level of being able to see specifically what the maps are doing in another way. And just for grease, for example, because it's mainly affecting the shininess or the roughness of the model, switching to that channel is a good way to really determine where that effect is taking place.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure, what else should we do here? I mean, there's so much you could do. We could probably bring in a moss layer. Let's add some moss to this, actually. Let's see how that works. So here's a nice moss material. So I'll just bring that into the layering stack in the middle between the concrete and the dirt. And then we can apply a bit of moss to the material. And I think that moss is always something that you can use for an asset like this that's weathered in nature, where you can put it into the cracks, but you can also put it all over the place. You're going to be fine with it. So let's create a mesh mask builder here. You know what? I'll take my AO-based dirt and I'll copy that and I'll paste it onto my moss, which is also a really nice feature that you can copy and paste masks as well. So let's see, where's the mask here? So you see here's our moss, but what we want to do, because I copied and pasted it, it retained all of the seed values of the graph and all of the different nodes that we're using here. So we have to mix it up a little bit, like changing the seeds and changing the scales. Otherwise, it's going to look exactly the same. But in this case, actually, we don't want to. How do you want to do this? We want to use our AO layer. Maybe just disable these two grunges for the moment so we can see what we're actually doing. Here it's actually not so bad if we don't break it up, right? Because the material blends in very nicely into our stonework. So maybe that's not needed.
Yeah, I think the soft transition is really nice. I mean, moss is tricky because it does survive in crevices, but it also requires sunlight, right, to be able to survive. So there has to be some kind of light source as well. Maybe we could add like a directional light source where some moss could appear.
That's also something we could do, but I think using AO here is perfectly fine because you won't be able to see the fully occluded areas anyways, and there's at some point of the day there's some light hitting it. But what I'm thinking is that it's not necessary to really break up the AO map. I feel like it works pretty well to just have it non-broken up, or if we decide to break it up, instead of using two grunges to break it up, maybe just break it up with one and then don't have a strong contrast. Here I still have the contrast increased, but I really don't like that it makes it so spotty. So I'll disable this, and maybe spot 6 isn't the best way to break it up because it's also very spotty, and instead of using a grunge, maybe it's better to break this up using a noise function that's a bit smoother, more like a Perlin noise. So let's take a Perlin noise. I don't see the Perlin noise, here it is. And our scale is pretty low here for this mask builder, so let's increase it a little bit. And let's not remove it so much. What I like about the moss is that it also adds a bit of color to the mesh, right? So we don't just have the grays anymore. Now we start to have some greens here.
Yes, exactly.
Here where you can see it looks really nice, where it adds the moss into this pit of the rock. I do like this. And we could
Someone says, when in doubt, use Rampage. Rampage is actually one of my favorite grunges too.
Absolutely.
One thing I also add on to rock structures like this is some kind of lichen or like whiter or lighter kind of surface that kind of adds more contrast so that you get like spots that are brighter, but also the ones that are really dark.
Absolutely. I fully agree. But I think we should probably...
I'm glad you agree.
Yeah, I think we should wrap this up. It's almost 2 hours into this asset, and I feel like it looks great. I do like how it turned out in the end. It has a very nice and interesting looking roughness map. We have a nice normal map here with tons of detail. We have a beautiful ambient occlusion map and a very rich base color map. That almost looks photorealistic, right? This looks like a photogrammetry asset almost. Pretty beautiful.
Yeah, I think also baking in some of those that dirt in the shadows really makes that kind of photorealistic effect as well with the base color.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. Just adds a bit of realism to it. What we could try as well is maybe add a bit of cracks to it if you would want to. Let's see what would happen actually. So where's our concrete? I'm going to add a layer here, and then we're going to mask that to our slabs. For this case, it would have actually been interesting to have a secondary mesh ID map where you could still have all of the slabs individually. Because now it's all over the place, right?
Right, and because in some cases the remesher has combined the pieces together, it'd be difficult to select something with like a submesh mask, right? Because those parts were modeled together as one piece, whereas if there were multiple submeshes, then you could select them individually.
All right, so here we have cracks organic, which is also one of those effects that you can always use. Yeah, I'm not sure if that looks great with the cracks on. Probably needs different, yeah, it would need more shadow type of cracks, right? Instead of those organic looking cracks.
I think it's definitely doable. You probably would want to blend a few different scales of those cracks together, on top of each other in a mask to give it a little bit more variation.
Yeah.
Or of course, the cracks organic actually has that built in. I'm just remembering where it has that kind of fractal look where it can create small, tiny fractures, but also really large ones.
I mean, it would be interesting to maybe mask off just one of the slabs to be totally worn off, but then in the story of the asset, it wouldn't make too much sense, right? Because why would one of those guys be so fractured? But what you can do is you can do that if you want to do it using a mesh mask painting. And again, now it's multiplied in, so we don't see anything anymore. But if I now start painting, I can paint in the cracks exactly where I would want to have the crack. And we can also change in our projected mask maybe the count and the width. Make them, yeah, actually that looks better if we decrease the width right now. This actually looks pretty cool. Maybe add another frequency to it. So we can paint a
Someone
bit of...
Someone actually mentions in the chat here, they said that they really want to work on texturing clothes within Instamat. And, clothes is actually a fantastic way to be able to texture things in Instamat. And they want to create stitches as well. They're asking if we could do a stream about clothes. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the suggestion. If anyone has a suggestion for the type of live streams that we do, definitely either mention them here or, reach out on social media or leave a comment on the live stream after the live stream is done. We'd love to hear your feedback and know what kind of stuff we can cover.
It's pretty cool how you can now just paint the cracks on it, right? With the paint stroke, I can just go over it and the crack appears. I don't like it, it's too much. I can again take it away or bring it back by just painting over it again. So that's a pretty nice feature to make the slabs look even a bit more custom, because a bit of stress fracture here between the rocks, I feel like that's really making a ton of sense, like even here, right? Because those rocks are resting on it. So adding that stress fracture to it makes a lot of sense in the story of the asset.
Absolutely. And I just realized is we also have our cracks decals, right? Where we could just paint on some cracks into certain spots as well. This is more of like a kind of a broader procedural work, but maybe we could even combine the two workflows together, start with some small procedural cracks and then use a brush that has a crack decal on it to apply specific things to particular concrete slabs.
Absolutely. I do like the procedural workflow because it allows you to be non-destructive and always go back and then apply it again. So that's why I like the separation between, stamping on the alpha or the decal of a crack versus just using cracks, triplanar them, and then painting those in where you like them, because then you can always go back and forth and it's just so much faster. And what I'm doing here with that layer to break it up again, we have that mesh ID mask, which only applies our cracks to the slabs. And then we have the mesh projected mask, which actually produces and projects the cracks onto our mesh. And the mesh mask painting we use to then show the cracks on the slabs where we want the cracks to be. So for instance, here I painted on that. If I don't like it, I can take the eraser and paint it out again, or paint it back again if I did like it. You could also use the the projector here, right? That would be another option of how you can create the cracks. If you don't want to use decals, you don't want to use the fully procedural workflow, the projection would be another way to do it.
Just so many different options in Instamat to achieve the effects.
All right, so I'll just save that asset here. I think it looks pretty cool. Like this. And then we can, if we want to export this, we can use the export button right here. That brings up our export window. And here you can choose which file formats you want to export as. PNG is great, it's portable. TIFF is faster when you write it. And it's also very portable, especially when it comes to rendering engines. And we have export templates for different rendering engines or export targets. But I want to use the RSX one because I want to show you guys this asset running in RSX. So we texture this at a 2K resolution, right? All the time we were in 2K. But if you want to, you can also lower the preview resolution here or even increase the resolution of your asset to 4K. And then within a few seconds, the whole thing has re-rendered.
Yeah, I always recommend, to, depending on your system specs, build the material at a resolution that's easy to iterate through. And then you could always go and like increase the resolution to something like 4K or higher if you need to. Just remember to keep checking back and forth, because at the end of the day, it's going to be at, the export resolution. And you always have to check and make sure that it looks good at the final result.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that 2K is the working resolution that works really well on almost all machines. And it's also the resolution you typically want to export your prop at. So you bake your textures at 2K, you texture them at 2K, and you export them at 2K. So at every step of the way, you know exactly what you're doing. So I'll export my object here. I click the button again. We want to save to the Instamat exports folder. Let me see what I have in there. This time I'm going to clean up the folder a little bit. It's empty. That's great. So let's go back here, click the export button. We choose to export to that folder. And what you can see with the export template, it's basically doing a channel packing for us, exactly in the way that RSX likes it. So we take our base color, export as is. If we have an opacity channel, we're going to include it here. And we're going to take our normal map, convert it to DirectX, and the AO roughness metal, all of the different RGB channels, we're going to pack different layer channels into. So there's no work that we have to do manually in Affinity Photo, for instance, to pack our textures together. Instamat is going to do it. And you can build your own template, by the way. If you, for instance, if you feel like that's a good basis to start with, you can just duplicate this, and I'll call it the abstract live template here. Click OK. And you see now I have more options because I can edit this template. For instance, let's remove the AO target and I'll show you guys how to build it. And to do that, we'll add a custom target. We want a color texture because that color texture should be our packed roughness map. I'll add RGBA. And we're going to do a slightly different pack. So here we're going to do a metal. So we invert it. Normally it's ambient occlusion, roughness, metalness. But we're going to do a metalness, roughness, occlusion map. So instead of ORM, we're going to do MRO. And now you see we have those channels available to pack into. And to assign a channel here, you can just go to the channels that you have down here and drag and drop a channel. So red should be metal. So I'll take my metal channel and I'll drop it into red. I'll take my ambient occlusion, drop it into blue. And I'll take the roughness and drop it into red. And you see, if I would export this, Instamat would do the heavy lifting for you and do the channel packing automatically. But I want to export for RSX, so I'll go back to RSX. And then I'll hit export if everything is set up right. By the way, guys, don't increase the type to 32-bit full range only because that sounds better or cooler. Bigger is not always better. It's just keep it on normalized 16. That's the best rendering resolution. That's where nodes will behave the best. Only use full range 32 when you know exactly what you're doing when you create a special texture for your renderer. But by default, keep it on normalized 16. This is something that we also, by the way, want to remove or at least hide it behind an advanced setting, because a lot of people that start using Instamat, the first thing they do is they crank it up to 32 and then the export or the rendering looks a bit funny. So keep that on 16. And keep in mind when the setting is gone, it's because we hid it away behind us, some checkbox you have to enable to actually show this. And then we're going to render our project to the export folder like this.
And just in that box that Manfred was showing, where the bit range was, it also allows you to export at a different format than you're currently previewing in. So you could say, for example, work at 2K and then run an export at 4K, and Instamat's just going to automatically reprocess all the texturing at 4K and create maps for you that way. So you don't necessarily have to preview the mesh at 4K and then export it as that kind of order of events. But I do recommend it because you don't want any surprises.
And here we have our baked texture maps. You see, this is the ORM map, the roughness, metalness map. Here we have our base color map. And this is the height map. We don't need it, so I can actually just delete it. And then we have our normal map here. And what's funny is, at no step of the way did we care about UVs, right? We didn't even look at the UVs. We completely forgot about looking at the UVs, but things just worked out. And that's what's so great about doing that process with Insta-Lot, is because things just work and you stop worrying too much about the UVs. And to be honest, if you look at the UVs, we just use the automatic mode. These are pretty cool UVs. They're pretty nice. It's not a lot of individually projected triangles. It's actually some bigger UV shells, and this is looking pretty nice. But that's what happened to me when I do this stuff within Instamat. I'll just forget about the UVs. I only care about them if the UVs don't look, if there's too much distortion or too many seams would be visible, but I actually don't even see the seams here on the asset. But we'll see how it looks in RSX as well. But that would be the point where I would then start caring about the UV unwrap settings. And by the way, guys, we're working on adding lots more UV features to Instamat as well. So I'll save my projects here, and then I'll move that to the background. So now we have Instamat and Instamat running in the background. By the way, guys, for those that didn't see how we created this asset, we loaded this into Instamat, where we built this kit bashed asset from many different smaller props. Let's see if I can restore the timeline. And we ended up building this like 3.7 million polygon mesh, which was super dense, where we would normally need to do a retopology on it in order to be able to texture and UV it. But we didn't do that. We just ran it through the Remesher, which gave us the resulting object, and it also gave us the bake textures. And by the way, it is good to directly use the baker here that's built into Instamat Studio, because if you would bake separately, you might not be able to, or that baker, even Instamat, might not be having all of the information available that Instamat has available when it comes to setting up a very specific baking cage or very specific ray length for different areas of the mesh. So that's something that Instamat can do. So make sure to bake in Instamat as well when you remesh your prop, and don't bake it in Instamat if you want to maximize quality at least. All right, so we have our asset. We exported it. I have my low poly here, and I exported my textures here. So we can just bring that together, put it all in one folder. Let's see how that looks in a rendering engine. So I'm going to open RSX in the browser here. I could be using the offline version, the native version for macOS or Windows, but I do prefer to use the browser. Let me see, do I remember the password from last time? I do. All right, so let's create a new project here and call that the kit bash wall. Confirm. All right, so let me increase the window size here. So we're in an absolutely empty project in RSX engine. If you haven't seen it, it's the engine we've been working on for quite a while. I'm not sure what's going on with my mouse here. Maybe I'm so used to doing things in Instamat now. I don't know the controls anymore. All right. So I added a ground plane, and as you guys can see, it's very dark, and I could add a point light to the scene, and then we can see the plane, but I can also just add a sky to it, which looks pretty nice. So we have a skybox. This is a different keyboard. That's why it was weird. The panning is different. All right, and to import our asset here, this is running in the browser. Keep that in mind, and I can still work as if I would be working natively. So what I do is I'll just drag and drop my mesh file into RSX, and it asks me what we want to do and how to import this. So should it be a static mesh? Yes. Import scale? That's fine. Create a template? Yes. Do import materials? No, we don't need materials here. We bring our own material, and then we'll just import the asset. And everything happens asynchronously, so I can keep working while it's doing the import job, and once it's imported, it'll show up, and it actually did already show up, so I can just bring in my asset. And here you see that's our nice little asset It doesn't have any materials on it just yet, but don't worry, we're going to add the material next. All right, so how do we add the material? It's pretty much the same process. So here are my 3 textures, and I can select them all, and I'll bring them into the browser. And you see this works the same way, where I can just drag as many files I want to the browser. I'll get my import window. And what's pretty nice is that we do a lot of heavy lifting behind the scenes to make this as easy as possible. For instance, you can enable automatic texture compression, which will make the textures use much less VRAM than if you would import them without texture compression. That's something that a lot of indie new game developers don't know about. So we make sure that you can just flip a checkbox and we'll apply automatic texture compression. And then you have to enable, or you have to manage color spaces. Again, it's something that a lot of people get wrong, but it recognizes this is a color texture, and it also then automatically suggests to enable sRGB color spacing, which is absolutely correct. So we're going to do that, import it. The next texture we have here is our ORM texture. It recognizes it's a mask, and it tells you not to create the sRGB or apply the sRGB color curve, which is also correct. We can import this as 16-bit float. In this case, we don't need it. We can just go with an RGBA8 texture. That's good enough for the mask. And then for the normals, we can also just use RGBA8, and it recognizes a tangent space normal map with DirectX. So let's go and import that as well. And you see, again, we're in the browser. Everything is cloud synchronized automatically, and everything just works. We have our textures here. And I can, if I want to double click on my if I want to see my texture, I can just double click, and you have this beautiful image viewer here in RSX. And I can tap back to my scene. I have my texture viewer up here where you can see it applied BC1 texture compression, uses 3 color channels, but still applies the sRGB texture curve. And the awesome thing is, because we applied texture compression, it only uses 2 megabytes in memory here. Even though it's a 2K texture, only 2 megabytes, that's a really good deal. All right, and then how do we create a material out of this? There's 2 different ways, or actually 3. One, we could create a new resource, and we could create a carbon material, which is a material graph that works like the material graph in Unreal Engine for the most part. Or you could create one of our standard materials, which is easier to use. It's more like the material editor in Slot Studio, where you have some textures, predefined texture slots, and you can just apply what you want to apply. But the third one is what I like the most. I can just select my textures, and I right-click and choose Create Material from Selection. And then it automatically figures out how your textures should be used and where they belong. And again, it uses a lot of, smart algorithms to figure out what could be what. You see it assigned the base color to the base color, the roughness to the roughness, and also selects the right packing channels. So all I have to do is hit OK, and we call that our wall material. I'll save, and there we go. This is our material, and you see it created a standard material, which is nice because you don't have to have these issues like in Unreal Engine. If you have like thousands of materials and it needs to compile all of the shaders when you start your project, if you use that stock material, which is very competent, where you can do things like subsurface or anisotropy, emissive, coding, sheen, but you don't have to set up a shading graph. You can just pick your textures from the library and everything just works.
I think that new material option there is probably one of my favorite features of RSX right now. I mean, that's so much time, especially when you have to do with, objects that have multiple materials and material sections. It's just a nice time saver.
Yeah, and the beauty is everything is automatically uploading to the cloud while you work, so there's no data loss. So actually autosave in RSX is at every step. Every material, every text you bring in, every scene you modify, everything is just automatically versioned. So I'll just assign my material here, and boom, there we go. We have the asset in place, and it looks really phenomenal in RSX. And now we could do some work on this, repeat it, duplicate it, drag it along, and to build a larger wall. Now we can rotate this guy right here, and then build a larger section of our wall to build our game with this.
Nice. And you mentioned that RSX has some pretty cool asset placement features as well, right? Where you can drag meshes and they kind of automatically snap.
Oh, right. Yeah, you have a lot of great snapping features built into RSX. I think if I hit command, you see it's automatically doing grid snapping here, but you can also, I don't know what the modifier key is. Yeah, it's shift and command is pretty cool as well. You see it automatically now snaps to the mesh. So I can easily place this along the surface like this. And we can bring in more materials from Polyverse, right? So if I want to have some material here, I can just open Polyverse and last time we created our pavement material. So I can bring in my pavement material that I did last time by just double clicking the material and then downloading it straight into my project, save. And again, it's doing a lot of automatic processing here, like combining the masks into a single texture, the roughness and the metalness in the same way we did for the mesh, but also applying texture compression. So I'll just do that and close this out. And you see up here, we see asynchronous tasks, things that run in the background. And you see right now it's downloading all of the different textures and then applying the texture compression on it. And it's insane that this works in the browser. So we can keep working.
Yeah, it's really easy to forget.
Yeah.
It's really easy to forget that you're in a browser, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a full engine. You're bringing in files, not just from your own, desktop, your own computer, but also from Polyverse, right? From your digital asset management solution. And it just kind of, just like, you do in Instamat and especially in Instamat, you kind of just focus on the creativity and you don't really have to worry about where you are, what machine you're running for the most part, and you can just start building something.
Yeah, so we have our pavement material to apply it. You can just drag and drop it onto whatever surface you want to apply it. And you can actually see that it enabled displacement mapping as well. The tiling scale is way too big. And you can fix that if you double click the material and then you do that here in the dedicated material editor, which is pretty nice. You have like this IBL, the studio lighting, but you can also change to sunlight, noon light, evening, dusk. But you can also select it here in the library, and then you click here to inspect the resource. So you have the same properties, which allows you to quickly modify the material while you can see the result in the scene. So I'll lock the UV tile, and I'll just change the scale a bit here so it looks more like I want it to look like. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, this material right now in the scene together with the wall standing on soil. So maybe just bring in a different material. Let's go back to the Polyverse library here. Ground. Let's see what we have. Maybe just that forest path.
And by the way, everyone, we're adding new materials to Polyverse all the time. So, we do monthly drops of not just materials, but also 3D assets that you can use in your projects. So, all you have to do, especially when you're here in RSX and you're just, building something quickly, is you can just go and open up the browser and see what new materials are there and then just easily download them into your project.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a modern way of working, right? You don't want to deal with, where's my file stored? At least I hate that. I feel like, the introduction of things like Dropbox, OneDrive, that really changed the way people work from, shuffling USB sticks and files around on local or network attached storage versus to just putting them somewhere, and no matter where you work, you'll have access to your files. And I feel like that's very similar to what we do with Polyverse, RSX, and all of the other tools. Here's my material. I can just drag it and drop it into my scene. And again, I'll have to adjust the tiling scale, so I'll just set that maybe to 20. Oh, that's way too much. 5. Yeah, so 5 looks better. And then we can actually, that integrates pretty well, right? The wall and the materials.
Yeah, nice.
Save it here. You can also control your sky very easily, so you can choose the time of the day for your sky, and it's analytical, so that means it computes the Rayleigh scattering, the sun position automatically on your cube map, the sky gradient. You can have stars, and you can have a lot of nice features here in the scene. That looks pretty nice. Yeah, actually looks pretty nice.
Yeah, I think
right?
it's really cool. I think just creating, from a small kit of just like a few rocks and some concrete, we were able to create this asset and these building blocks to build up something really nice and really just do it kind of without really having to think too much. All the tools that we use to create this asset, like, using the Remesher and then texturing things with Instamat, now that we've created that process once, we can do the exact thing, almost, 10 times as quickly with all the things that we've set up like this. You can just go and kit bash another rock piece, remesh it, bring it into Instamat, bring it into RSX, and you can really quickly start building out a scene.
By the way, check out these performance metrics here. This is pretty insane as well. The engine runs at consuming just 900 megabytes on the main thread. Like, compare that to other engines on the market. And look at the main thread and render thread time. Like, it's really, really fast, even in the browser. But what I just noticed is really amazing. So if I enable the volumetric clouds here in my scene, you can see what happens to the scene. Like instead of being very bluish in hue because the sky doesn't have any clouds on it, it becomes more grayish, more realistic, and I really like this. So you can see that we have our clouds here on the horizon, and we can set up clouds in RSX, and they're volumetric clouds, so you can fly through them, you can set them up, bring your own cloud texture, paint your name into the sky. You can control the height of the clouds. So let's maybe set that to something between 2,000 and 4,000. Oh, actually, that's not what I wanted to change. I wanted to change the cloud bottom actually to be maybe 2,000 meters above to 4,000 meters above, like this. And you can control a lot of the properties here, the coverage, make it more sparse or more dense. And you see how the environment changes the light. If I remove the clouds, the materials look more bluish. And as I increase the cloud coverage here, things gray up more because there's less blue in the sky now. But let's go back to this level, and then we can control how the base noise looks like. Do we want to have more sparsity or more bigger blobs of clouds? And we can control the detail noise as well. There's also wind, by the way, so you have moving clouds, and you can cast shadows from your clouds over your terrain. There's a lot of great features here in our cloud system. Yeah, it looks really, really nice. And one of the things you see that the auto exposure goes from like very bright to very dark, and the reason is that we have all of those black spots here, so the camera tries to adjust the exposure to those black values, which is not the smartest thing to do. Let's see if I can fix that by just duplicating the plane, moving it down, and just scaling it up. Yeah, that would have to be, it would need to be a gigantic plane, and now we have the displacement on it, so maybe just not do it. Yeah, pretty nice scene here with our asset. We should build a game with this at some point. All the assets that we texture, we have to navigate into one direction towards some goal. Maybe you can use this wall here to texture something at some point. But if we remove the skylight, let's disable that and take a look at how it looks if we just bring in a point light, for instance, like this, just to make sure that it renders really nice in all situations. So this point light is very yellowish, and you can adjust the color temperature like this, and you can also cast shadows like that.
One of the things we haven't talked too much about with RSX here is that you're designing this scene kind of a quick review, design review situation. But what's nice is that RSX is collaborative, right? You can have multiple people in this scene, and then you can make this your design review scene and just start adding assets onto it and communicating back and forth and making decisions. It's just a game changer when it comes to
it's true. I could have invited you to the scene. Maybe you can do that at some point in the future. Yeah, and then we have our effect settings on the camera, and like you can do in other engines, you can also create an effect volume where if you enter that volume, the settings from that effect volume will become active. So I'll create an effect volume, scale it up, and now I can control how the post-processing stack looks like when I'm inside of that volume. For instance, I can control the chromatic aberration. It's an effect that I personally like. If you look at the fringes, I don't know if you guys can see that in the stream, but what it does is it adds that distortion of the RGB color values that would happen because there's refraction at the lens of the camera. So I'm a big fan of this. Yeah, if I set that to a very high value, you can see how this looks like. Because I really like this effect, we spend a lot of time, making this effect look really nice. So there's this complex version, but there's also the simple version. So this is the version you most likely find in most game engines, but we created a really nice one that's way more complex. We have tone mapping, automatic exposure, depth of field that you can enable bloom. It's always great to have. We don't have, there's some bloom here in the scene. I don't know if you guys can see that here. And then
people are saying in the comments that the performance is really fantastic. They're saying, it's just really hard to believe that we're working on the web and that we're able to build something like this just so quickly.
Motion blur. We don't need motion blur. This is static. And also a nice effect is volumetric light. So I'll enable the volumetric light. Now it's enabled on the renderer, but the renderer is not doing anything because you still need to configure your volumetric light settings. So you can just enable this, flip the switch, and you see that's how easy it is to get volumetric light going in RSX. And you can see it looks really beautiful how we have that the light illuminating the particles in our atmosphere here. And you can see how the particles behind the wall are not illuminated, and you can see how that makes the scene look so much more realistic, that volumetric light. And you can control the color, and you can control the density. You can add a height fall off if you only want to have the volumetric light close to the floor. I think that's what we do here with the fall off. Yeah, so you see now it looks like more mist or fog that's close to the bottom of the scene. I think you can also move the height around. You see you want to move it up. Now we're completely in the mist. That looks pretty cool actually. Yeah, that looks awesome. Right?
And that was a really massive change that it really just took the scene to the next level there with that volumetrics.
Yeah, I mean, I love volumetrics. That just makes it look so much more cinematic. Even if you just add a very little bit of it, just that the lights illuminate the atmosphere and you see the shadows more in the scene. You see like how you can see the shadow here, even though there's not much going on. It's a really nice effect. So let's decrease the density here a little bit. So you see like this, there's very little volumetric particle density here, but it still looks really amazing. I mean, the post-processing stack of RSX really is something. If you look at the beautiful bloom that we have here, and this is stuff where we iterate over and over again. I think we had like 4 or 5 bloom implementations at this point until we're happy with the bloom. But it looks really awesome. Yeah, so this is our material. And of course, you can also control AO. You have a lot of settings for screen space, ambient occlusion, screen space reflections, where you can control the radius of your AO, the intensity of the AO. You can make it very big or very small. I mean, all of these small effects, you have to dial in a way that you almost don't see them, but together they form a very nice, holistic image.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's all those small touches and slight tweaks that just build up the scene. It's very easy to just say, full volumetrics all the way. Like, it looks great. But just adding just a little bit of, some layers here, dialing in the shadows there. It's what makes it really an art.
Yeah, and what's also pretty cool is you can create those fog volumes in RSX. So here you can see this is a fog volume that modifies the particle density in our scene, and you can scale this guy up and then basically create a layer of very thick fog just right above the ground. And what you can also do is you can bring your own noise texture that you could create in Instamat, for instance, and then have the noise appear in a very specific way, or you use a Perlin noise and then you see it creates noise now based on our noise scale here in the volume. What could we do here? If we scale up the y-axis, it should look like very long streaks of noise.
It'd be a bit difficult to see on the stream. Maybe if we kind of get closer.
Yeah. I'll just place it on the ground here, scale it up. You can see some noise here. I didn't set it up right, but what the ideal way to do this would be to have the noise streaks just going upwards. You see it's moving, but I feel like it's moving in the wrong direction.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe I set up the scaling correctly. Oh, now you see like some mistiness here going on over our ground plane. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Got a question about grounds and objects. What about objects and grounds blending between the seams? Is it possible to blend objects together so that they kind of smoothly connect together between the ground and the object itself?
Yeah, you can write a shader that does this. You can use typical dithering and TAA effects to do that. That's something we have a node in our carbon material graph that does exactly this. And all you would have to do is apply that effect node into your rendering, and that's it. You'll get that effect for free. But there's also more complex mesh blending you can do these days. We don't do that yet, but I'm sure at some point we'll add it if people ask for it. Yeah, but I think we're like 2.5 hours in, or how long are we in? 2 hours. It's been 2 hours, guys. I think we have to wrap this up, but maybe as a last test, let's see if this actually works. I'll unload the project here, and then I'll remove the local data, so I don't have any data here. And as a matter of fact, I'm also going to sign out, and then it's going to delete all data of that I had locally, and then we'll sign in again. And if I open this project, it should look exactly in the same way as it did before. So let's see if that works. Yep, you see no files, and it's streaming in all the files. And then we can open our demo scene. And you see what's awesome is you see this low-res version of the wall and low-res materials. And it's actually downloading all of the data while you open the project. So you're able to bootstrap big projects really fast. And even if you don't have the data locally, you get a very low-res representation of your scene, materials, meshes, sound, anything would just be there instantly. And then we refine as you use the scene, where we download exactly what you need to build your scene. All right, Jeremy, but I think that's it for RSX for today and Instamat. We actually showed quite a lot today. We showed Instamat, we showed Instamat, we showed Polyverse, we showed RSX. I think we almost showed all of our products at this point in today's stream, which is pretty good.
It's a good time to, move all the channels together into one, right?
Perfect,
now we have one source for that, and we just show a bunch of our products here in one stream. That's a good timing.
Absolutely. But I think this is the kind of stream we should do more often, to be honest, where we show bigger workflows, not just in one project, but of course also do the deep dives like we did when I was building this pavement material that we just downloaded from Polyverse. I think these also make a lot of sense, but I feel like the holistic, the encompassing view on all of what we're doing and how it connects is pretty great as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It just goes to show that the kind of ecosystem of software that we're building and how compatible they are together, just really how smooth it is to, kind of hop between each of the different pieces of software that we can use, and also how often you don't need to hop between pieces of software, like, for example, with RSX and Polyverse, where, you just have things built in right there. And it's the only kind of workflows that you can get when you kind of build all these integrations to work so nicely.
I mean, it's pretty insane that we created a prop and we didn't do any of the steps that you would normally do when it comes to creating the prop. There's no retopology, there's no UV unwrap. All of the stuff where if you look at X or Blue Sky or any of these social networks, that's what artists complain the most about. And we didn't do any of these steps. And we still ended up with a beautiful material, a beautiful prop, and a beautiful scene in the end in RSX. And none of this is conventional. It's very radical, very different, but so much faster and so much more fun. So I think that's pretty awesome. By the way, guys, don't forget to hit the subscribe bell, hit the notification button, and do all of these usual YouTube things that I think everybody knows about. But I think it's important to remind people about this, right? Me, myself, I also forget. I have a note here on the teleprompter that tells me to remind people about exactly this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great to see, the engagement that we've been getting so far on these live streams. It really goes to show that, we're having a great time and that people are learning a lot of things, and it's really getting some really nice traction to be able to see and demonstrate all these different workflows. And I really think this is the best way to demonstrate, like we were talking about, how these different products work together. It's different projects, because we can do this kind of more longer form content for today, a little bit longer stream. But it's the only way to really kind of show how these workflows work so well together in such depth.
Maybe we can build an asset simultaneously, where one person would be building, the kit bash, where the other person would be doing the stuff in RSX. That would be pretty awesome as well. But maybe going back to my screen, Mr. Producer, there's some more things to talk about. And remember, guys, I was quite excited about Battlefield 6. It released in the meantime. I finished the campaign, and I played a few hours multiplayer, and I have to say it's quite authentic Battlefield. Like, it feels like Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4, and it doesn't feel like anything in between. And that's one of the reasons why I really like it. The campaign was a bit short. It was fun, but it was very short. And I feel like visually the first few missions are not the same quality as some of the later missions, and I don't understand how that happened, because especially the first mission should be like the peak of what you can deliver. I feel like it should be an arc. You start off in your game and present extremely high quality visual cinematics, and then it can go into a slump, and at the end it should ramp up a bit. And here was the inverse. It was like the beginning was like some of the graphics were not as good as I expected. I mean, they made their decision not to do things like having a really fat post-processing stack like Call of Duty these days when it comes to ray-traced shadows and SSGI. It looks really beautiful, especially in multiplayer, just based on the amount of stuff that's going on in the screen, the amount of foliage, grass, and tanks and planes flying around. I think that's really where it's strong. It's really awesome. I really like the new Battlefield, but it's really surprising how things change. I remember at the time when Battlefield 3 and 4 released, everybody complained that Call of Duty was falling behind and the rendering was very primitive. And then COD really stepped up, and the rendering these days is really phenomenal. And Battlefield is a bit not as aggressive when it comes to we want to render the most cinematic renders that we can do. And they're more going for a good balance between running really fast and very scalable to a lot of complex things in the scene. But overall, I approve of Battlefield 6. Did you play it, Jeremy?
No, not yet. I haven't had the time. In fact, Hades 2 has been taking all of my time these days. Maybe we could talk about that another time. But that's a completely different kind of game. But I'm really interested to hear, how what you think about these types of games, because it is a huge trade-off, these days. How much can you put in the game versus how nice can you make the game look? And also, you have to kind of take into account, what systems they're playing on, how big the game is, how long it takes to be able to play it and stuff like that. So in your opinion, how does this game kind of stand? If you were given it a rating, would you give it a out of 10? How would you say in terms of overall experience you had with Battlefield?
I mean, I didn't play it so much, maybe 15 hours, but I give it a solid 8.5, something like this. I personally would want to have the campaign to be a bit longer and visually more striking, especially in the beginning. The characters more realistic. The plot wasn't bad, but it's like the usual shooter plot. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's always some flashbacks and recaps, and it's very confusing in the beginning. So I would want the plot to be a bit more easier to understand, more like an action movie, where you can follow along and you understand where it's going. And typically these games hop between different character perspectives, and there's not a lot of prologue to what's going on, who you are, and what in what situation you're in. And I feel like that's missing. But overall, I feel like personally I give it an 8.5 because it's more like the kind of Battlefield that I liked a lot, which is just a class-based shooter, not too many individual player classes, where the class is bound to some personality or some look of a character, but you're just an assault or you're a support. I like that much more. I like it if games are easier to understand, and what you know about the game before you can apply it. There should be more fun. There should be more action. I feel like that's true for this iteration of Battlefield. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I appreciate games that I can just kind of pick up and play very quickly, and especially nowadays where, always seems like things are getting busier and you have less time to play. At least I have less time to play games as much as I want to. So having a game that kind of balances that nice kind of storytelling campaign, but also something I can just jump into and get into the action quickly without having to worry about, juggling the rest of my day, So it's a nice thing to have.
Yeah, that's a big constraint for me, to be honest, where I can just play the game and easily get into, and this applies to the combat system as well. For instance, Horizon Dawn, I don't have a lot of time to play games anymore. It's typically a Friday evening, a Saturday evening, a few hours. And if I have to learn like a mechanic that's very much like time-based, where you have to press something at the right moment to attack the character, and you die within a few sword strokes or whatever. That's really difficult for me. Like, I could never get into Horizon Dawn for that reason, because the fights with the dinosaurs, they're very time-based, and you have to know exactly what you're doing, and you have to spend some time grinding on the game to really understand it. I really never got into it, and I feel like it's sad because it does look really great and people really like it. But I fully agree, I need a game where I can just jump into and play the game and don't have to learn too much about the mechanics of the game and the systems that are active in the game. So that's why I like these shooter games, I guess, because they're always the same. There's not much to learn. They're easy to get into. They're easy to get out of. The campaign you won't forget some important points of the campaign because it doesn't make a lot of sense anyway. So you can just keep playing it like a shooting gallery or something.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really great to have studios and series like this that really, especially since you mentioned that Battlefield's kind of coming back to its roots a little more. It's really nice to have these kind of games coming out today.
Absolutely. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about. Maybe you can go back to the desktop, Mr. Producer. And there's this Andrei Karpathy released this thing called Nano Chat. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but it's pretty insane. The guy built a very small, he writes here, 8,000 lines of code to build this like full LLM that's trained from scratch, uses reinforcement learning to work like a chatbot, and it's doing all of this in just 8,000 lines of code. And I think that's pretty crazy if you think about how much money is being invested into these LLM AI companies to be competitive and build something. And I believe if somebody can create what you create within, a few thousand lines of code, I'm not sure if it's that big of or if it's that secure of a business. If you compare that to what we've been building at Abstract, where it took us 6 years to build Instamat, and we're 7 years into RSX, where this technology is so complex and the stack is so deep that you can't, like 8,000 lines of code that in Instamat that might get you some of the complex nodes, like the image synthesis that we do analytically, where we don't use an LLM. That might be 8,000 lines of code in and by itself, or even more. And I feel like if just a few thousand lines of code replicates what the big businesses are doing, I don't think it's a secure business. And I think investors know this as well, where nobody wants to. There was like at the beginning of the year until like June, there was this frenzy to invest into AI companies. And if you look at the state of the industry now they don't even want to invest into AI anymore. So previously they stopped investing into anything but AI, and now they stopped investing into AI as well, because you saw DeepSeek coming up, replicating exactly what ChatGPT is doing. Then you have these other guys that did one, which is doing exactly what Stable Diffusion is doing. And then they did really well with video models as well, where you see the competition is so fierce, and the engineering reality of the technology is so small. Of course, there's a lot of research involved, and training these things on a big scale is somewhat expensive. But still, if the engineering reality is so small, it is a big danger, I believe, to those companies. But that was a big thing, Nano Chat. I didn't try it myself, but the buzz around it is pretty big. You can actually train your own, like ChatGPT on your own GPU for around $100 if you rent the GPU in a cloud somewhere. But that's so crazy. It's like a few hours, and you have your own ChatGPT, and you don't have to use somebody's foundational model and then fine-tune it. You can just train it exactly on your content. Or I'm sure if you take this further, the model will be much better. But even as is, I think it's like GPT-2. It actually writes it surpasses GPT-2 core metric, which is pretty crazy. Yeah. Are you still here, Jeremy?
I am. I was just letting the pause, letting it drop, letting the mic drop for a second there, just because it's true. It's interesting how the barrier to entry for software has changed so much in the last few years of people being able to make things. I mean, especially on the web, as I've noticed, anybody can build a website, but now it seems like anybody can also theoretically code a website and use, the tools that we have to understand how these things are built a little bit more proficiently. The barrier to access that, has become a lot lower. And now that people are, I think it's interesting that we saw, companies start up very quickly based on these kind of AI things, and almost like wrappers into AI, tools that, companies were built around, right? And I think it's really interesting to see the kind of opposite of this happening here, or the proof that, well, okay, just because you can do that, a lot of other people can do that too. So it really makes the companies that are investing into large products and ecosystems like we are, it makes them a lot more I would say special, but also a lot more poignant to the industry. Why it's important that we have companies that are doing things like this, because that barrier to entry, it keeps changing so often.
Yeah, but I think the barrier to entry for tech like we're building is insanely high, because you need to have really good people working on this for so long to even achieve, any resemblance of what's needed to be competitive. And being just competitive is not enough. You have to add more value. You need to do things differently, like we're always trying to do. Otherwise, it's just the same, and nobody's going to use it unless you make it free. But then you spend like 5 or 6 years building something, and then you can't even sell it, which is a big danger, of course. I mean, the same is true for us. We have to see, how we monetize or how we incentivize people to buy a pro license. That's an ongoing issue for us. And you'll see us do something here. Of course, we want to keep the Pioneer license, but we have to figure out, how to get people to switch to buying a proper license to actually, so we can get some return on this massive investment that the company has been doing. And by the way, I'm really happy that you said, what did you say? How did you put it? Everybody can build a website, because that's exactly how it would narrow, the usefulness of wipe coding and these LLMs that are used for engineering. They can't do much more than build a website or a bash script or something like this. If you would ask it to build an engine, it would never ever be able to come close. If you even ask it to implement something, a smaller feature, a complex node, it'll fall apart. It's doing really well on the stuff that you find a million times repeated on the internet or in some books, but it's not going to do well for the stuff that's not covered. And for instance, if you ask it to implement a GPU paint engine or anything that it doesn't find that we do in RSX or Instamat, it'll not be able to do a good job. I think even Andre, who created NanoJet, said he tried to use Codex and these other tools, but they're just not helpful at all. You can just use them for boilerplate for the most part. But I think at this point, guys, we should wrap it up. It's been 2 hours, probably 2 hours and 15 minutes at this point. I hope you had a great time. We're going to be back next week on Wednesday, hopefully around the same time. So make sure to tune in. Check out the new video by InspirationTuts, spread the word, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and see you guys